And now I will turn it over to Mayor Nicholson for some opening remarks.
Good evening, everybody. I'm Jared Nicholson, the mayor of Lynn. I am joining you from my car because I'm about to run into one of the ARPA meetings that we are doing. But wanted to say hello first. We are so excited to be hosting this meeting, taking this step on the School Street project. You will be in very good hands once this meeting gets started with the team from MAPC and then our principal planner, Aaron Clausen, Diversity, Equity, Inclusion Officer, Faustina Cuevas, Danielle Smith, our policy director from the mayor's office, and I believe I saw Attorney Vitale from the city solicitor's office as well. I also see that Sean Reed is here representing Senator Creighton, and we're joined by former school committee member and colleague Maria Carrasco. But just want to welcome everybody, extend my gratitude and appreciation for your willingness to join us in this effort to think about the possibilities and options at the School Street site. As many of you know, using public property to support our affordable housing goals was one of the big goals of the housing production plan that was adopted by the city last year and approved by the state this winter. And we're thrilled to continue working with MAPC, who helped us in that effort on the implementation of that goal, and to be joined by the folks who worked on the REMAP team with our Diversity, Equity, Inclusion Officer, Faustina Cuevas, the Racial Equity Municipal Action Plan, who also keyed in on the housing production plan, and specifically the recommendation there for an equity impact assessment, and thinking through how we could take both those really important recommendations and start to work on them in this site. So really appreciate everybody's work on this. I will certainly be caught up to speed by the team, and apologies that I need to step out, but thank you again to everybody for putting this together and for joining.
All right, thank you so much, Mayor Nicholson. It's good to see you again. My name is Karina Oliver Milchman. For those of you that I didn't get to meet through the Housing Lynn process, I'm Chief of Housing and Neighborhood Development at MAPC, and I'm joined by a couple of colleagues today, including Christian Brandt, who is doing community outreach and engagement for the School Street redevelopment project, and Alexis Smith, who is in charge of analysis and the RFP process, which we'll talk about in a little bit. So I'm going to turn it over to Christian, because he's going to take us through the orientation to the site, which we'll do via video since we're virtual tonight and aren't going to walk the site together. But first, I'll just note that the bulk of tonight is a presentation, and then we do have a fair bit of time set aside for a Q&A. So I'll ask folks if they have questions as the presentation continues to please put them in the chat. We'll try to get to as many as possible tonight, and we'll save others to follow up with later. And then I did want to note that in addition to this forum tonight, which is live, obviously, and we'll post a recording of it on the project website, there will be a survey that launches this Friday and will be open until April 13th. And that's where we're really looking to get your input on what your vision for the School Street site is. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. But first, let's get familiar with School Street.
Great, thank you, Karina. I am going to share my screen. Actually, I did not share that correctly. Hold on 1 second. There we go. Okay.
Christian, I think the audio might not be up.
Interesting. Let me try a different way.
All right, thank you, Christian. So through the magic of video, we got to walk what is a pretty impressively large site in about 3 minutes tonight. And we got to stay out of the cold. So hopefully folks have a little bit of a sense of what we're talking about when we say School Street now. And Alexis is gonna get us better acquainted with the site and the context momentarily. But first, I want to give a little bit of context for this effort that we're launching right now. Next slide, please. So it's already been decided that the primary objective of the School Street redevelopment effort is to create affordable housing on the site in downtown Lynn. And we got there through an almost 2-year-long process called Housing Lynn, a plan for inclusive growth, which is the city's new housing production plan. It was locally adopted by the Planning Board and City Council last fall and approved by the state. Next slide, Alexis. So how did we decide that public land would be used for affordable housing when feasible through that process? First, there was extensive data analysis, quantitative and qualitative data from engaging with the community that found there was considerable unmet need for affordable housing in Lynn. So 62% of households in the city are low income, meaning they earn 80% or less of the area median income, which we'll talk about what that translates to in a little bit. And more than 40% of Lynn households are cost burdened, which means they pay 30% or more of their household income on housing costs. There's only about one deed restricted affordable housing unit in the city for every 4 income eligible families. So we know from that process that there's a real shortage of affordable housing in Lynn compared to the needs of the community. Next slide. So as a result of that analysis, Housing Lynn established the goal of increasing production of affordable housing, and specifically for those with the median household income in Lynn or less, which is $53,500. And that's a deeper level of affordability than your typical 80% of area median income. So the goal of Housing Lynn is to produce housing that really meets local need. And one of the strategies to advance that goal that we recommend in the plan is to use public land to incentivize affordable housing production. And one of the ways public land does this is by really cutting down on costs of development, because the city can, either charge nothing or charge a reduced fee for the land in exchange for community benefits like affordable housing. So that's sort of the stage for this process. I want to tell you a little bit about what this process is going to look like around School Street. First of all, it is going to be community driven. We're doing 2 public forums. The first is tonight. The next one will be in June. The city will be hosting a 3rd one in the fall. And over the length of that project timeline, we'll also do several focus groups, which will be smaller, more intimate get-togethers for people to speak about their vision and goals for redevelopment at School Street. We're also going to be doing considerable analysis of the market and financial feasibility to understand what kind of community benefits we can require of developers, while still ensuring that redevelopment at the site is feasible, that it makes sense. And that analysis plus the community input will be combined to create several redevelopment scenarios, which is what we'll be presenting to you and the larger community in June for your feedback. And then ultimately, after that, we will be issuing a request for proposals, which means we're asking developers to respond to this development opportunity and the priorities we've set for redevelopment with their ideas and what they propose for the site. As part of that process, we're going to be developing with your input criteria for equitable development, and that criteria will be used to assess the responses we get from the development community for School Street. And the objective, the hope is that that criteria will be used for other development in Lynn as well. Ultimately, MAPC will be providing recommendations for the preferred proposal we receive from developers for the city to move forward with. Next slide. So the project timeline, we kicked things off this month and we're going to continue through September. We have the public forum tonight, and then, as I mentioned, another one in June. We're also launching a survey this Friday to get your input on your vision for the School Street site. As I mentioned, we'll be doing site analysis, and that includes both the actual features of the site itself, including existing conditions like current usage and topography and abutters and so forth, as well as analysis of the context for the site, so the broader downtown area. We'll produce those development scenarios to get your feedback on them in June, And then we'll issue the request for proposals, give developers time to respond to our criteria for redevelopment, and review those responses and make recommendations to the city in early fall. Next slide. So I'm going to hand it over to Alexis Smith now to give you a better sense of the site beyond the video we watched. Alexis is a principal planner. She was also involved in the Housing Lynn process. She did the analysis that informed our inclusionary zoning recommendations in that plan. Thanks, Alexis.
Thanks. It's great to see everyone here virtually tonight. Thanks for being here. So I'm going to take a few minutes to run through the school street site for those who may not be familiar with it or who need a reminder. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about what development could look like and the things that we're going to be asking you to think about as we ask your priorities for the site. So the school street site is, very on the very edge of downtown, pretty close to the water. It is in a really great location in terms of access to amenities and retail and restaurants and food. On this diagram, you can see that the smaller circle is about a 5-minute walk and the larger circle is about a 10-minute walk. So within very easy walking distance, there's the commuter rail station, there's everything, all the amenities of downtown. There's multiple schools, there's access to open space. So it's a fantastic site and is going to make a great spot for future housing, for particularly affordable housing. A couple of, just a brief overview of what's there now. The site, which is the gray area in the middle, is as I mentioned, right on the edge of downtown. So on this diagram, the red is commercial. So that's retail, food, sales, and the orange is mixed use. So commercial on the ground floor with residential above. So, to the one direction, it's, there's a lot going on. There's a lot of commercial, a lot of, commercial and residential mixed. And then in the other direction, as you move away from downtown, there's kind of smaller scale. You can see that the parcels are a little smaller. The gray boxes are buildings, so those get a little smaller as well. So it's a kind of situated right on the edge of two different areas. Let's see. Again, just to jog people's memories, there's a lot going on in the neighborhood, from a block or two away, new mid-rise development that's sort of on the higher end. There's the Greater Lynn Senior Services literally right across the street from the site. All the businesses on Union Street kind of range, a lot of locally owned businesses in terms of that are kind of running all along Union Street, and then smaller scale housing as well. As you all know, there's this site has fantastic access to transit. There's multiple bus lines. Most of the bus lines that run through Lynn come very close to this site, and from there access the many other areas of the region. The commuter rail is right there. So again, particularly when we're talking about affordable housing, it's important to make sure that it's located in great spots that are easy access to opportunity, and this site definitely fits that criteria. So just a little bit of a closer look at the site itself. It is about a 2 or 3 minute walk to get across the entire site. So it's a pretty large area. It's currently all parking, and there are two different, separate, kind of sub areas of this site. Both are parking. But it's, again, as you can see from some of these photos, very, very close to the, larger and more intense uses downtown. The last thing I'm going to get into in terms of context is the zoning. That's the city regulations that kind of says what you can build on any given piece of land. The red is the downtown district, or the central business district. of which, this site is a part of that district. And in that district, there's a lot of allowed uses, mixed use, certainly being one that we'll be focusing on. You can build up to 10 stories, although that doesn't mean you have to build that high. It's just what you're allowed to build. Right across the street, things start to, the scale ramps down a little bit, but you're, still adjacent to some business uses, which is the pink and the higher rise residential uses. So again, just kind of illustrating that this is on the cusp of a couple different neighborhoods, but that there's a lot of potential here in terms of development and also community benefit. Just as a comparison for something that folks might be familiar with, the Gateway North project, which was built within the past couple of years, is a little bit smaller than this site. It's 1.4 acres, where this site is 2 acres. And on a site of that size, they were able to build 71 units plus 2,000 square feet of retail. So a mixed use building. Again, so this is not quite this site is a little bit bigger, but to give you a sense of what's possible. On this diagram, you can see the Gateway North footprint overlaid with the site, which is, the Gateway North is the pink area. And then that gray L-shaped box is the Gateway North building. And then the dotted line shows the parking area for Gateway North. So that kind of gives you an idea of how, on a project you might be familiar with, these things are balanced. And now I'm going to, you all are probably more familiar with the site than we are. So we don't want to spend too much time going through the details, but this will all be available online if you all want to spend a little bit of more time, really digesting this information. But for now, I'm going to get into some information on housing development and how it could work on this site. So when a developer is thinking about building housing on a particular site, the kind of housing that gets built depends on a couple of different things. A for-profit developer, which is most of the development that you see happening in Lynn, in this state, in the country, is probably going to build market rate housing. Depending on local regulations, they may be required to build a small amount of affordable housing, but generally what they build is going to be market rate. And that means that whatever they're renting, wherever they're charging for rents, has to cover the cost of what it costs to build the building. On the other side of the scale, you have mission-based developers. This sort of development happens far less frequently because it requires a lot of public subsidy, but mission-based developers will likely build primarily affordable housing to a range of different affordable incomes. They may also decide that they want to build some market rate units, for a mix. Nothing is set in stone, but in general, they're going to be building some affordable unit or primarily affordable units. And in this case, they still have to cover the costs of what it costs to build the building, but they're covering it both with rent from the affordable units and with public subsidy, because the rent on an affordable unit is not enough to cover to pay for what it costs to build the building. So again, just keep that in mind. No matter whether a developer is for-profit or mission-based, they have to be able to pay for the building construction. And that construction is probably going to be pretty expensive, regardless of whether or not you're building affordable housing or market rate housing. Today in the greater Boston, it costs at least $350,000 to build a unit, perhaps more depending on site conditions. That's for a 1-bedroom apartment. So even higher if you're talking about housing of an appropriate size for families. So and this is true regardless of whether or not you're building affordable housing or market rate housing. Concrete costs the same amount. Plumbing, steel pipes cost the same amount. And so it takes a lot of resources to build, which is why it's so expensive. Why housing is so expensive. So on this particular piece of land, on the School Street property, I want to talk about, you know, how folks decide what gets built. In this case, the city has a lot of leverage because it owns the land. So that gives it two key areas where it can kind of where it can guide what happens there. First is that the city can say, you know, can demonstrate or can give guidance on the goals for development. It could say, you know, we want to see this, and this happen, and we're going to prioritize this kind of development. The city has already done that by saying we want to prioritize affordable housing for this site. Now, the developer also has goals. So if the city's goals don't align with the developer's goals, then you know, the developer might just say, we're not interested in building anything. So there's a little bit of a back and forth there. You know, the city can say, we really want affordable housing here. And then the developer comes and says, all right, well, we think we can build this much affordable housing. And, you know, eventually they'll be, you know, reach some equilibrium there. The city can also influence what gets built through zoning and permitting. This is true for all parcels, regardless of whether or not the city owns it. You know, this is where that zoning diagram we showed before, where the city has said, okay, on this lot, you can build up to 10 stories, whereas on a lot further from downtown, you can only build 5 stories. Again, it's important to remember that the city isn't actually building the housing itself. The city just isn't in the business of building housing, which is why it needs to partner with a private developer, you know, either for-profit or mission-based, to actually build the housing. Another piece that is really important is the financing. There's a lot of things, you know, the developer is the one who's actually doing the building, but a lot of what they build is actually determined by the bank, because it's up to the bank to say, yes, we're going to lend you this money, or no, we're not going to lend you this money. We don't think that this is a project that is, you know, we don't think this is a project that's feasible. And so the banks will say, all right, well, what are you charging for rents? And then if the developer, you know, if the bank doesn't think that the rents are high enough to pay for the cost of building the housing, then they'll have that same conversation with the developer, to say, you know, all right, we really think that you need at least this level of rents in order to make the project work. And the banks also have a minimum threshold for profitability, or the investors as well, who say, you know, if we don't think this project is going to be profitable to a certain degree, then we're not going to finance the project. We're not going to loan you money. So there's a lot of cooks in the kitchen when it comes to deciding what gets built, and, you know, and what you charge for that. In the case of mission-based developers, the financing also includes subsidy. So that's funding from the local government, you know, from the city, from the state, from the federal government. And in that case, that also comes with requirements. And in that case, the requirements are usually more along the lines of, okay, well, you have to charge an affordable rent for this many units. You can't charge more than this certain amount for units. And here's where the city has the second area where the city has a lot of leverage, is in the cost of land. Because the city owns the land, they can, you know, decide to you know, sell it and, you know, for revenue. And then it's, you know, kind of more on the developers, you know, that would put the developer more in control and result in more market rate units. Or the city could do, as it has, you know, said it's going to do, and prioritize affordable housing, in which case using the cost of land really helps, Karina mentioned this already, lower the development costs and really makes affordable development a lot more feasible and a lot more doable. So all of that is what we're going to be thinking about in the coming months, as we talk about what, you know, what your vision for the site is and what the city wants to, you know, prioritize on the site. So again, I've mentioned this already, but the city has already said, based on the Housing Lynn process that have a ton of public input, hopefully many of you were involved in that as well, the city has prioritized affordable housing on this site. Affordable housing can mean a lot of different things. There's many different income levels that qualify for affordable housing from, I'm going to use some jargony terms here, the very low income end of the scale, which is officially called 30% of area median income. That's what that AMI stands for. And that's someone who's earning minimum wage, say. And it goes all the way up to moderate income, up to 80% of area median income, which is more in the range of someone or earning a teacher or a police officer salary, perhaps. Now, getting back to what Karina mentioned before, these numbers are for the whole entire region. The federal government sets them for all of Greater Boston. And so while this last column, that 80% AMI, might be low income in many communities, here it's actually it's not getting at those deeper in those income levels that are more representative of folks who live here, that Karina mentioned. And so we really want to here focus more on these middle and lower ends of the spectrum, because that's more reflective of where the need is in the city. So the city's already prioritized affordable housing on this site, but that could mean a lot of different things. Prioritizing affordable housing could mean, the city building as many affordable units as possible. It could mean really prioritizing deep affordability. So looking at that first from the previous slide, looking at that first column of folks who are very low income, earning 30% of the area median. Or it could mean saying, we want to make sure that there's affordable units for families, larger units, that's not an option that folks are able to find in town today. So all of that falls under the affordable housing umbrella. And that's one of the things that we're going to be asking you about as part of the survey that we'll be releasing on Friday is, what kind of affordability should be prioritized for this site. In addition to affordability, the city could also ask for other community benefits. It could tell developers we want to prioritize, some retaining some public parking on the site. We want to provide ground floor space for community organizations or retail for local businesses. The city could say it's really important that we retain some green space and some open area in the close to downtown. So all of those things are, when the city controls the land, they're things that the city can say, we want developers to think about how to provide this. And just because the city says this is our priority doesn't mean that a developer is going to build it. Again, it's a back and forth about what all parties can make work. But being clear about priorities is a great starting point for the city. So kind of continuing in this vein of what's feasible. All of these things that I've been mentioning are phenomenal benefits for the community, but they cost money. Affordable housing costs, as I said previously, at least $350,000 for each unit to build. That's a lot of money. I don't need to tell you that's a lot of money. Parking also costs a lot of money. Surface parking costs about $12,000 for every parking space. But if you're talking about parking underneath housing, which is probably what would make sense in a site close to downtown, that's like $30,000 a space. Also, very expensive. Community space or ground floor retail costs about $200 a square foot. And all of these things, while they're great benefit for the community, they cost money. And because the city is going to be working with a private developer and asking a private developer to actually build the housing, there needs to be enough money to pay for these community benefits. So just kind of looking at this slide, a market rate unit in this first column, the blue dots kind of represent how much money it brings in the first column and how much money it costs to build in the second column. So a market rate unit in that first row brings in a lot of money from market rate rents. As you all know, market rate rents are expensive, and it costs a fair amount to build it. But in general, that's a positive in the balance book. Looking at the last column. Whereas if you say, all right, well, now we want the units to be affordable to more moderate income households, then all of a sudden there's a lot less money coming in rent. And it begins costing more to build the housing than the units can pay in rent. So all of a sudden now you're at a negative. If the city wants to prioritize very low income units, then that's even less money coming in rent. And all the while, these units still cost the same amount of money to build as a market rate unit. Parking in community space, they cost much less to build than a housing unit, but they don't bring in any money. Or parking might bring in a small amount of money. So those are all things that are, these things cost money, and the money to build them needs to come from somewhere. Typically, you would say, a developer might say, all right, well, we're going to build some market rate housing, and we're going to use the money from that market rate housing to pay for the affordable units or to pay for the community space. In this case, the city can also say, we want you to use this land that we're making available to offset the costs of the affordable units. But in general, the city can't ask for everything. The city needs to prioritize what it's asking for, because otherwise there won't be enough money to build all of the things that the community might want. So the way that this could play out is the city could say, all right, if based on this process, based on what we hear from the community, the highest priority is as many affordable units as possible and as deeply affordable units as possible for lower income folks. That probably means that you're going to get mission-based developers responding and showing interest. And in that case, the funding for that will come probably from a range of subsidies. Which is how mission-based developers operate. The city could say, all right, we're really looking for a mix of both affordable units and market rate units, because we want to make sure this can happen as quickly as possible. So in that case, it might be sufficient for the city to simply offer lower land costs without having to worry, without asking the developer to find additional subsidy. Or the priority could be primarily market rate units with some affordable units, in which case the market rate units would subsidize those affordable units and would require very few, if any, resources from the city. All of this, again, the city has already prioritized affordable housing development. So this last one is, probably not where things are going to land. But in general, just to give you an idea of the trade-offs that are involved, and, no matter what kind of housing gets built, somebody needs to pay for it, whether it's a bank or whether it's through subsidy and through public funding. So that kind of leads into, again, just a comparison. Again, the Gateway North project, which some of you may be familiar with, that was a mission-based development that included 8 units for very low income folks. So that lowest, that first column from the income slide. 45 units for low income folks, 10 units for moderate income folks, and then 8 market rate units. So this project included, units for all across the income spectrum. But even a mission-based development can't build exclusively very low income housing. And even an mission-based development in particular can't build a ton of parking plus affordable units. This project has fewer parking spaces than it does apartments. So in this case, the priority, seems to have been, units for very low and low income households. But, if the priority had been as much, parking, then that would play out differently. If the priority had, depending on what the priorities are, it would play out differently. But even in a mission-based development where the priority is affordable housing, there's only so much subsidy available, and folks look at a range of options, or a range of affordability levels. So all that is leading into, we want to hear from you what your priorities are for School Street, both in terms of what kinds of affordability are being provided, how much, for families, and then also whether there are other community benefits that the city should consider as priorities. The survey is going to be up on Friday. If you're here and you provided your email address, you will get an email letting you know when it's up and live. And we hope to hear from y'all. This is this is very important in terms of deciding what's going to happen next. Based on what we hear back from this, the city will establish priorities, and then we will come back to you with possibilities for different development scenarios. So we want to hear from as many people as possible. Please share this with folks in town who weren't able to be here tonight, and we look forward to hearing what your priorities are. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Christian.
Just a couple of really quick announcements. Thank you, Alexis. I want to acknowledge that I think our Ward 3 counselor, Coco Allensung, is here. So thank you for making it out tonight. We appreciate your participation. And I want to note that we will try to speak slowly and take some pauses to help out our interpreter, Chisel Arias. And I think that covers the announcements. So Christian, I will pass it to you.
Great, thanks Karina, thanks Alexis. Thank you everybody for your questions. I'm gonna get us started with some of the questions that you posted in the chat. If you have additional questions, please feel free to post them in the chat as well. So the first one that I have on my list is there a way to define affordability for this project by our municipal AMI? And I believe this poster noted that the municipal AMI was 60% of the region, but I might be misremembering that from the chat.
So I'll start with that. Alexis, feel free to add on. But I think because of the priorities established in Housing Lynn, which is providing the foundation for this effort, we are defining the primary objective of affordable housing for this land as affordable to households earning less than the city's median, which is about 53,000. So that's sort of the baseline where we're starting from. The exact affordability mix will depend not only on community input and the goals established by Housing Lynn, but also on the financial feasibility of development on the site, which will be informed by the other priorities beyond the affordability mix for the site. So as Alexis mentioned, parking will play a role. Other community benefits like community space or ground floor retail will impact that feasibility as well. Alexis, I don't know if you have more to add to that.
No, that's it.
Awesome. Next question is, how would the market research work that you were referencing earlier in the presentation? In other words, what would be the items or criteria that you're looking for when doing market research?
A lot of what we're doing is just understanding how housing works in Lynn specifically, so that we can understand how much the city can ask of developers. You understand, housing is so different, even just from neighborhood to neighborhood. And so getting a really firm understanding of, okay, this is how much rents, this is how much is being charged for rents in this area. This is how much it costs to build a, this kind of housing specifically, or that kind of housing specifically. These are the sorts of things that developers, can probably do. And this is what's going to maybe be too much to ask developers. It all gets back to, understanding how much the city can ask, and without, it being so much that the project can't pay for itself. So in addition to just kind of researching, what's out there, and for that, we have a lot of market industry sources that we will be pulling from, as well as having conversations locally. We'll be doing a financial analysis that will actually test out a bunch of different options. Again, depending on what we hear, from the survey and from you all, it will test out, this type of housing versus this type of housing, and then with this much parking versus this much parking, and will really help us understand, all right, we think that this is really doable, and that this is something that a developer can deliver on, versus, maybe we're asking for too much, or maybe we're not asking for enough, and we could, probably push for more affordability.
Great, thanks Alexis. All right, our next question is, what other outreach strategies are happening in this project? There are only 36 participants total today, not including or not excluding, excuse me, the presenters and staff working on the project. So how long does the community have to give feedback?
I can take this one. So I will say, not to nitpick, but we had 38 at the height of the event. But that did include, of course, MAPC and city staff. So we had more registrants for this event than folks who did turn up. And one of the reasons why we're doing a survey in addition to tonight's forum is to try to increase the number of folks we hear from, because not everyone can turn up for an hour-and-a-half meeting on a specific evening. So the survey is launching, as Alexis said, this Friday, and it will be up until April 13th, which is a nice chunk of time for people to make space to take the survey, but also for them to share it among their families, friends, social networks, to try to increase the number of people that we reach. And we will also be promoting the survey to a broader audience beyond the folks who turned out tonight. At the end of the Housing Lynn process, we emailed our Housing Lynn participant listserv, which is quite long, and asked folks to sign up for School Street updates if they're interested. So we have a long list of folks waiting to hear from us. The city also is doing its own outreach through their website, social media, and own listservs. So they'll blast out updates about engagement opportunities as well. As I mentioned, this process is going through September, so we have time to come back and forth with the community. There will be a second forum this June to present ideas for different kinds of development and collect feedback on that. And between April and June, we'll be doing a series of focus groups where we'll be inviting folks from different stakeholder groups to hear from them specifically about their priorities for the site.
I will also just add to what Karina said specifically about the project website. The project website is hosted on Lynn and Common, which some of you might be familiar with. There are lots of other projects that the city is hosting on that website as well. And that really gives folks an opportunity to read through the information and take a survey and sign up for stuff all at the same. And I just see Aaron shared the link in the chat, all at the same place in actually most of our other projects, that the opportunity to do all of those things has actually been spread across a lot of different tools. So it's somewhat of a unique opportunity to be able to include all of this in one place, so that people just have to go to the website to get to the survey, sign up for information, read the PowerPoint from tonight, and watch the recording again. So we're hoping that that also makes it a little bit more accessible for folks, instead of having to navigate lots of different access points. So that is just one thing to note about the information from the project.
If I could just add one last comment to that. As Karina and Christian pointed out, there are a number of opportunities to engage in this process and get access to the survey. And we'll be sending out through all our distribution lists. But for those of you who are on this call, we find that the best response that we get for surveys in particular is when you're sending them to your friends and family and other interested parties. So if you can share this information and simply the web link to Lynn and Common, that's one of the best ways we can ensure we get a good response to this process.
Awesome. Thanks, Aaron. Thanks, Karina. I am going to take us on to the following question, and that is, do these costs factor into the cost of purchasing the land? So these are the costs that Alexis, you were speaking of to earlier. And is the city open to disposition of the lot below market rate?
So go ahead, Aaron.
Alexis, you probably can answer the technical question better, but I'll answer the second part. We're specifically working through this process to identify the priorities so that we can build an RFP for the sale of the land that will allow for us to sell it at below market rate. That's the underlying premise.
So part of the analysis that we'll be doing is based on your feedback that we get through the survey, if affordability, as deep affordability as possible, or as many affordable units as possible, if that is a very high priority, then we will analyze how that plays out in terms of a below market sale price, and work with the city on what the right expectations are, and how they can leverage the land, that the city owned land, in order to really push for as much affordability as possible.
Now, Alexis, can you speak to the question about whether the cost of parking and retail that you had cited reflects a below market land cost, or if those are distinct costs?
Those are just what it costs to build, regardless of whether or not you own the land. Typically, when a developer is looking at what a project is going to cost, they look at the land in one bucket, and then they look at the cost to build the project in another bucket. So that's where you see the community space costs, the parking costs, the costs of building the apartment, or the affordable unit. So the short answer is yes, it's separate.
Great. Our next question is, what other subsidies can the city offer? This is sort of related, of course, but what other subsidies can the city offer the developers besides the lower land cost?
There's a lot of different ways to go about that. The lower land costs are huge. I think that I don't want to speak out of turn and put something out there that depending on what the city is considering, but I think the city could consider property tax relief. It is it is part of the HDIP program, and that would certainly be another very powerful cost offset to achieve deeper affordability. If the highest priority is as much affordability as possible, and the folks who are responding are mission-based developers, they will almost certainly be looking for federal and state sources as well, to build a building with like the Gateway North project that we looked at, that has mostly affordable units, that takes a subsidy from a lot of different places. And so if the priority is affordability, they may be looking beyond the city as well.
Great, thanks, Alexis. Next question is, what other I just asked that. The next question is, what can ARPA dollars be used as a subsidy for this project?
I can't speak to how the city will prioritize use of those ARPA dollars, but yes, ARPA funds can absolutely be spent on affordable housing, to buy down the cost of affordable units so that they're affordable to lower income folks, to build more affordability. That is definitely one of the uses for ARPA.
And for folks who may not be aware, ARPA is American Rescue Plan Act funds from the federal government to help with the COVID recovery. And one of the eligible uses, as Alexis said, is affordable housing production. It's actually a really unique opportunity to get considerable funding from our federal government for affordable housing. It's brand new, doesn't come around a lot. So it's a great opportunity to take advantage of. Aaron, were you going to add to that?
I was just going to say briefly that the city, through the mayor's office in partnership with the city council, is undergoing public engagement and outreach on how the city should utilize its ARPA funds. So that's related to this project specifically, for sure, but also important as it relates to affordable housing city-wide. And I think if not put in the chat, we can add it, a link to the city's webpage with information about that outreach.
Aaron, thank you so much. I just want to quickly add, your voice is really important in this process. The surveying around ARPA and your input closes on March 31st. So if you feel that funding for the ARPA should be used for subsidies, you really should make your voice heard. So I just want to put that out there. We need more feedback. I will drop the ARPA website in the chat in just a moment, but we do have a community-wide ARPA meeting next Tuesday, March 29th in Lynn City Hall Auditorium at 6 p.m. And I invite folks to come and share their opinions on this matter. So thank you.
Awesome. All right, so our next question is, would the project consider community land trusts as a way to ensure affordability?
I think everything is on the table. And that's, one of the things that we're looking to folks for in terms of what kind of affordability specifically it should be prioritized. That's certainly one avenue. For folks who aren't aware, community land trusts are a form of home ownership where the land is owned in common among all of the folks who have housing, in that building on that land, and that helps make sure that the land is that the housing on that land is permanently affordable, and decisions are made collectively in a group. If that's a high priority for folks, the city can absolutely include that in the RFP and say it is, a priority for us to, we prefer a community land trust development or form of development or whatever the case may be. Just because the city says this is what we want to see doesn't mean that developers will come and say we can build that. But with the city owning the land, it's a really good chance for the city to just put out what its goals are, and then to to make that clear from the outset as the starting point.
I'll just add, I think we're about to get into a number of questions with ideas like that to make these projects work. And I think at the end of the day, it's about priorities. And so the survey is going to try to force you to rank your priorities, because we can't put out an RFP that asks for everything and offers minimal things. There are plenty of communities that have done that and they haven't gotten the interest from the development community that they need to actually produce something. So we'll want to be sensitive about how we're crafting the RFP. Request for proposals.
Great, thank you both.
Christian,
Oh, sorry.
That's okay. No, this is sort of just an add-on to the question. I think it is related. There are methods by which the city can require long-term affordability in a project beyond just a land trust. And most financing or tax credits that are utilized for those moderate and low income units have a requirement for that and is attached to the land. It's an affordability restriction. And the city can bolster those and emphasize that even and strengthen them with the land disposition. That's the unique tool.
Yes.
I was just going to say the unique tool of an RFP gives the city a lot of control in the long-term use of that land beyond just regulation. And again, to the point that I think Alexis and Corinne and the team have made tonight, that's part of the balancing act in crafting an RFP, is making sure we ensure long-term benefit to the community, but a project that's also financially feasible.
Aaron makes a great point. It is sort of a best practice with affordable housing today to strive for affordability in perpetuity, which means 90 years, typically.
Great.
I mean, not literally, it doesn't mean 90. Perpetuity means forever, but in the housing world.
Thank you all. So we have the next question, which is, once the survey results are in, how much impact do they have on crafting the RFP that we were just talking about?
It's a great question. So we have a little ways to go before we get to the RFP. There's an interim stage where we're coming back to the community before there's a draft of the RFP. And that's to share different ideas or scenarios for development on the site that reflect both the community input we get through the survey, as well as the results of our own analyses, including the financial feasibility analysis. So we will be trying to balance the priorities we hear from the community with the realities of the market, put them together into a few different ideas and bring them to the community. Then we'll get feedback on those ideas from the community, and the preferred scenario will form, or elements from different scenarios, perhaps, as long as they balance, will form the crux of the RFP, among other inputs. So I think there's a whole nother stage during which the community can give input before we even write a draft of the RFP.
Just again, a quick follow-up to that point, and I agree with Karina, but I think it's important to note that the land disposition process ultimately has to go through the city council. And so this work, this engagement with the community and your feedback, I think will help us hone in on a redevelopment opportunity with particular outcomes aligned with the folks you all have identified. But that has to eventually go to the city council and be crafted and issued by the city council ultimately. I just want to make sure that that process plays out in that way.
Great, thank you both.
Right, so sorry, I'll just add, so as
ahead.
important as it is for Aaron and his staff and MAPC to hear your input, it's really important for the city council to hear your input directly as well, because ultimately it is in their purview how to proceed with the RFP. And so we can talk about that a little further on in the process.
Great, thank you. The second question is, or the next question is, why would the city consider a private developer over or versus a mission-based developer?
I think that depends on what the city's priorities ultimately are. If affordability is one of several priorities, alongside open space or, community space or whatever else, and then that is possible that could be provided by a market rate developer. Market rate developers do build affordable housing, as part of their units. In many cities, it's required to build a small amount of affordable housing within their buildings. If what we hear is that the community's priority, if the priorities end up being as much affordability as possible for as low income, residents as possible, then probably the only people who are going to be interested are mission-based developers. That sort of project doesn't, is not what a market rate developer does. So a lot of it just depends on where the priorities land. But yes, if the focus is affordable housing, then that's probably going to be a mission-based developer.
Great, thanks, Alexis. So our next question is, the Gateway Washington Street project had 71 units, ranging from Section 8 units to market rate units, with most units subsidized at some level. Will we be able to access state tax breaks and other supports that made that development viable?
That's a good question. This typically, it gets a little complicated, but typically the city wouldn't be the one asking for those, for that support, for those resources. The way, if the city chooses to award the parcel to a nonprofit developer or to a mission-based developer who has proposed something similar to what you just mentioned at Gateway North with a lot of affordability, that then the developer would say, take their project and go to the state and say, listen, we've got a great project. the city's super supportive. They're giving us the land for below market. This is what we want to do. And then the state would give them money directly. It's, you know, it's so yes, that's absolutely possible. It's just a question of who approaches and asks for it, and the timing of that. That said, we already talked about the ARPA funds that are coming in. You know, that does not follow the typical path. You know, that means that puts a lot more resources in the city's control. So I think it's a lot of different approaches at a lot of different times in the process.
Great, thanks, Alexis. The next question is, will the project include housing suitable for families, e.g. 3 bedrooms, or will that be determined via market research?
I think that's primarily through the priorities that are established as part of this process. If we hear back from folks that housing for families is a really, really important thing here, then the city can craft an RFP, a request for proposals that says, you know, we want to see family size housing. So in general, housing, market rate housing tends to be 1 bedrooms. So, but again, because the city owns the land, there's a lot of leverage. And so they have the city has the leeway to say, you know, we want to focus, our priorities are 3 bedrooms. So the answer to a lot of these questions is going to be, you know, it depends on what we hear. But if you feel strongly about family housing, please let us know. Let us know in the survey and in the input you offer.
It depends on what we hear and on our financial feasibility analysis as well, because we just have to keep in mind we have to balance what we're asking for and make sure that developers are able to deliver it. And there certainly is a need for family housing in Lynn. There's also some regulatory constraints for family housing in the zoning that we would need to address. So these are all things that we need to juggle and balance. Aaron, sorry, passing to you.
No problem. You mentioned the thing I was going to note, which is right now in the zoning code, the city limits in the central business district the percentage of units that can have more than 2 bedrooms to 10%. So there's a regulatory restriction at the moment.
Great, thank you all. Our next question is about prioritizing union jobs. So the commenter stated, can we prioritize union jobs on the project and require that unions prioritize local hiring?
That's, again, certainly something that the city can make clear as a priority. And if that's something that's important to you, please let us know.
So you'll see on the survey that we do a lot of what you're asking about are options under our survey questions. So I'm glad to hear there's such consistency with what we heard through the Housing Lynn process that we were able to anticipate some of this. You'll also see on the survey that there are some open-ended questions where you can add additional ideas that we might not have anticipated. So please definitely take the survey, tell your friends.
We've said this several times before, but I do want to emphasize that, you know, I keep saying, well, it depends on what we hear our priorities and what comes back. One of the things that we're going to be asking on the survey is to kind of pit all of these priorities against each other and to say, all right, well, you like family size units, you like deep affordability, you like, you know, lots of affordable units, you know, all this great stuff. But we'll be asking you, okay, well, how do you, which one is the most important? Because again, that's what's going to be really important when the city issues this RFP for developers, is being very clear about the highest priorities, because we can't ask for everything.
And most of you know, because you've seen it happen before, that there are RFPs that go out there that ask for everything, or not even everything, but just multiple things that don't work together. And you don't get a response from the development community, and then nothing gets built. So we want to avoid that in this effort here with this site.
Thanks all. I'm just noting that Maria just asked in the chat, are your surveys in both languages, English and Spanish? And they are. They will be live on the website, on the project website on Friday in both English and in Spanish. All right, I believe we have one last question, and that is, what is required here per unit regarding parking? And is that a good idea? Or what are you considering, at least, requiring here per unit per parking?
I mean, Aaron, please feel free to jump in. Right now, the zoning requires, I believe, 3 parking spaces for family size units and no parking for 1 or 2 bedroom units. So that's the underlying zoning. I think it'll be up to the developer in the city to have a conversation about whether or not that makes sense for, you know, who's going to be living in this building, and whether the project may need, whether relief is needed, or, whether additional parking, if it comes back that a high priority is, providing some replacement parking, then, that's something that the city can make clear as well.
Just Alexis, that's absolutely right. Also, just from a zoning perspective, commercial uses in the CBD, in the central business district, you do not need to provide on-site parking. I do think, just a shout out to the MAPC team. You have done studies, I think, on this very specific issue in the region that I think is informative on actually, what the actual parking utilization is for multifamily housing. But yeah, I think, again, that gets back to this process and informing us what's the next best step.
Great, thank you. We just got.
Sorry, Christian, can I interject to just
Yeah.
ask Alexis maybe, or Aaron, to speak a little bit about how the underlying zoning will impact this call for project proposals? Because there are some, obviously there is zoning on the site, as Alexis walked through. Some of the requirements of that zoning might make it difficult to achieve some of the priorities that we hear from the community. So there is an opportunity for developers to seek zoning relief, but it does complicate the process. As it takes the opportunity from a streamlined, predictable opportunity for redevelopment to something with inefficiency and unpredictability. So Alexis and Aaron, I don't know if you have more to add to that. It's sort of another element that we need to try to balance. How predictable and efficient do we want to make this for developers to give us what we want, versus how much do we want to ask for things that are going to make the process more complicated?
Sure, it's a good question. So any project proposal that comes through an RFP needs to meet local and state regulations. So they would, in any project, would need to provide, the number of parking spaces that's required under zoning, which, as we just talked about, is pretty flexible. But the other kind of restriction that we talked about earlier around family housing or units with more than 2 bedrooms, that will limit what could be developed, and may contradict what we hear from the community. So there's usually 3 different, I guess, avenues that can be taken. One is what we call by right, which means a project meets the zoning requirements and doesn't vary from them in any way. Then there's projects that might need what's called a special permit, which is a discretionary permit. In most cases in the City of Lynn, the City Council is the special permit granting authority, and the council has the ability to approve or deny those projects. And usually you want to approve or deny those projects based on existing plans or studies, or, I think this process could inform that decision making. And then the last one is, if you cannot meet zoning, you can seek a variance from the Zoning Board of Appeals and they can be approved, whether it's a use or a dimensional requirement, like the bedroom limitation. And they do get granted in Lynn and other communities fairly regularly, but it does add, I think, a lot of uncertainty to a developer, which to developers, uncertainty is a bad thing. And particularly with variances, introduces a legal barrier, because the standard for granting a variance is a high standard from a legal perspective. So that adds additional uncertainty to a project. And so that, those are part of the balancing that will need to go forward for a developer in looking at the priorities as they're articulated in the RFP and what's allowed under, really most specifically, zoning.
Great, thank you all. We have one last question. Well, I guess there's one question that has been asked just now in the chat, and that is, one of the slides indicated that the average building cost is $350,000. Is this the same for single family or multi-family units?
No, that is for a 1-bedroom unit. If the community is very interested in having, different types of housing, larger units, multi-level units, those cost a lot more, both because a single family house is a lot larger than a 1-bedroom unit. So there's just more to build. And also a single family house takes up a lot more space on the land than an apartment building does. And so the costs, the cumulative costs per unit are a lot higher, because you can just build a lot less if you're building single family housing. One of the questions that we ask you is, we're not really looking at single family housing, just because it's, that's I think the site is appropriate for more dense types of housing than that. But one question that we do ask is, do you envision some lower scale housing, like townhouses or like triple deckers, or do you, or is it a priority to just build as much affordable housing as possible? And that's another thing to trade off. If the community really wants to see townhouses and triple deckers and smaller scale housing, then that means less affordable housing, because that type of housing is more expensive to build and you can build less of it. So, we'll be asking you to weigh in on, how do those different things stack up? But that was a long way to answer. Yes, a single family house is a lot more expensive to build than that $350,000 that we quoted earlier.
I'll just note, this is not exactly on point, but I think Alexis and I, and perhaps Christian, were making it sound like we're asking you, 100 questions on this survey. We're not. It's actually a very brief survey. There's only 11 questions. So it shouldn't, if you know what you want, it shouldn't take you very long to take it. And you can tell your friends that it should be a fairly quick exercise.
All right, I don't see any additional questions in the chat. I did just share the links to the project site, both the Lynn and Common webpage, but also the School Street Project webpage in the chat. And the survey links, like we mentioned earlier, will be posted on the School Street Project site on Friday. So I think I will turn it over to well, actually, I guess some of our next steps, we sort of talked about this in one of the answers to the questions, but coming up for us, we have focus groups that Karina mentioned. We'll be working on a development and financial analysis that Alexis discussed, and also developing some development scenarios for the site based on the feedback that we're getting, and also the development and financial analysis. So our next public forum will be June 2020. That information, of course, will all be published in advance on the project website, which again, I just posted into the chat. So that is the place to go for updates about the project. I will also just say that it's the place to go for updates about any of the other projects that Lynn is doing that are on that site. There are lots of other opportunities to engage in similar projects happening throughout the city. And just to double check, Karina or Aaron or Alexis, is there anything else to add before we close out?
I'll just add that for transparency's sake, we will also be sharing the results of the survey with the public, a summary, so that you can see what your neighbors had to say, and so that you understand when we come back in June with these development scenarios, what community input we based them on.
Great. Aaron, is there anything else that you would like to add?
Just I appreciate everybody taking their time and joining us tonight to learn about this process and get some background information. And please do share the survey around. We really do want to hear from a lot of folks on their interests for the redevelopment of this property. So thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, everyone. Have a fantastic rest of your evening, and we look forward to connecting with you again soon. In the meantime, please share the survey far and wide. Have a good night.
Thanks, everyone.